Good morning. Let's just give a few seconds for others to join in. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the 2021 Austrade International Development Webinar Series. This is a session on accessing opportunities with the Asian Development Bank. My name is Sheila Trans, and I'm speaking to you from Austrade in Manila. Before I get started, I'd just like to take you through a few quick housekeeping items. To reduce background noise, all microphones will be muted during the webinar, apart from the person speaking. Please note that the audio quality may fluctuate during the webinar. At the end of the session, the panel will be taking questions. In order to ask a question, you simply type your question in the space provided as shown in this slide addressed to Ms. Grace Halcon, and we will cover as many of these as we can during the Q&A session. If you have country-specific questions for today's webinar, please include the name of the country in your question. If we run out of time, we will revert back to you by email after this webinar. Please note that Austrade is recording this webinar session and make the recorded version of this webinar, including all audio and visual elements, accessible to internal Austrade staff and the general public via the website and other communication means. Attendees who are not in agreement may exit the webinar now. To deliver the welcome remarks, I would now like to introduce Mr. Tony Mcdonald, Executive Director for Australia, Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Georgia, Hong Kong, Kiribati, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Solomon Islands, and Tuvalu at the ADB. Tony was with the Commonwealth Public Service for over 27 years, primarily with the Treasury, working on broad range of policies issues, including macroeconomic forecasting and assessment of current economic conditions, international development, superannuation, taxation and banking and financial markets, and budget and fiscal policy. In 2004, Tony was awarded a Public Service Medal and the U.S. Secretary of Defense Medal for Exceptional Public Service for his service in Iraq. Over to you, ED Tony.
Thank you, Sheila, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this ADB and Austrade joint event, the 2021 Virtual Business Opportunities Seminar. My name is Tony McDonald, and I represent Australia and 10 other members on the ADB Board of Directors. ADB's flagship corporate strategy document, Strategy 2030, sets out an ambitious vision for a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. Asia and the Pacific has made great strides in poverty reduction and economic growth in the past 50 years. ADB has been a key partner in the significant transformation of the region and is committed to continuing to serve the region in the next phase of its development. To deliver on this commitment will require ADB to respond to changing and more diverse needs of the region. Increasingly, this means looking beyond the simple traditional lending relationships focused on the lowest cost bidder, to an environment focused instead on value for money, where developing members are looking to ADB to add value and have a strong and enduring development impact through knowledge solutions and innovative approaches to increasingly complex development challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic has only accelerated these trends. As part of this journey, earlier this year, ADB launched 3 Adb Values that ADB will be client-centric, trustworthy, and transformational. This is where you come in. Australian firms already have an excellent reputation in ADB and the region, with a strong track record of performance based on extensive knowledge of the region, deep experience across a wide range of sectors, and our positive can-do attitude and resilience. That said, I am aware that it is not always easy to identify the opportunities available at ADB for Australian firms, or how to take advantage of them, which is what makes today's event so timely. I would like to thank Austrade and the ADB Business Centre for organising this virtual event. Let me now turn the floor over to Christopher Lim from Austrade for his opening remarks. Christopher.
Thank you, Edie Tony. And Mr. Christopher Lim is the Australian Senior Trade Commissioner and Minister Counselor for the Philippines to say a few words. Christopher brings a wealth of skills in international diplomacy, trade, facilitation, and strategic analysis, having served as the Australian Consul General in Chengdu, with earlier postings at Australian missions in Beijing, Washington, and Singapore. He is committed to realizing the full potential of the relationship between Australia and the Philippines by expanding productive trade and investment. Christopher is passionate about lifting the profile of Australia in the Philippines and that of the Philippines in Australia. Prior to joining Austrade, Christopher worked at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Over to you, Christopher.
Thank you very much, Sheila and Tony, and welcome everyone to our joint Asian Development Bank Austrade webinar. Austrade has been working closely with the Asian Development Bank for over 20 years. We are proud to contribute to ADB's tremendous strides over the decades, as Tony has outlined. Our cooperation has brought enormous benefits to developing members and their communities, not to mention stakeholders such as yourselves. The cooperation between Austrade and ADB has 2 main objectives. One is to raise awareness among Australian businesses and the academic community about the ADB, its objectives and priorities, and of course the business opportunities associated with its development assistance programs. The other objective is to increase Australian private sector participation in ADB-funded projects, especially by focusing on Australian capabilities that best align with ADB's areas of interest. As international development continues to evolve to meet shifting needs of developing member countries, and the global COVID-19 pandemic throws up new challenges, it is important that we have a better and deeper understanding and closer engagement with multilateral banks such as ADB, especially in our own region. Supporting development in Asia Pacific is a core priority for both ADB and Australia. Normally, we would have an Australian delegation visiting ADB's headquarters in Manila to take part in the annual Business Opportunities Fair. But of course, due to the pandemic, we are not able to do that now for the 2nd year running. Instead, we are closely collaborating with ADB to bring you this webinar. Today, senior ADB officers will be sharing the latest information and insights on agribusiness, education, health, and doing business with ADB and the ADB procurement system. We will also have a session that has always been a favorite, hearing from an industry peer about knowledge sharing and practical advice on the do's and don'ts and lessons learned to be successful in procuring into development projects. Australian private sector expertise, technology services, and equipment are valued by the ADB. Our close geographic proximity, understanding of regional needs, and direct relevant experience make Australia an important partner. On behalf of the Australian government and Austrade, I wish you a productive session. And once travel restrictions are lifted, we look forward to resuming our normal tempo of bringing Australian delegations to the annual ADB Business Opportunities Fair. I look forward to meeting you in person then. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. We are now pleased to be joined by the key officers from the Asian Development Bank. They will share with us some ongoing and upcoming business opportunities within ADB's sectoral and regional departments. To start off, we would be hearing from Mr. Eric Gagnon, Principal Procurement Specialist, to give an introductory remarks. Eric joined the Procurement Office of ADB in 2006 when he covered the procurement operations in a number of countries in South Asia. Between 2009 and 12, he was based in ADB Resident Mission in Hanoi, where he was a resident procurement specialist for Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. After heading the consulting services unit of ADB for 2 years, he now leads the procurement unit responsible for the procurement in the Pacific region. Eric has been our speaker during our roadshows in Australia in the past years. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Sheila. Good morning, everybody in Australia. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual business opportunities seminar. I'd like to thank colleagues from Austrade, both in Australia and at the Australian Embassy in Manila, for organizing and hosting this event. Despite the pandemic, ADB's portfolio continues to grow and new investment projects are being prepared. ADB's current sovereign operations portfolio is approximately $102 billion, which represents the total value of all ongoing investment projects financed by ADB and implemented under government guarantees. In addition to this, we have an additional $14 billion worth of investments in our non-sovereign portfolio. In 2020, ADB directly administered $206 million worth of contracts for consulting services. Those contracts were directly tendered for by ADB, and contracts were signed between ADBs and consulting entities. Of those contracts, close to 4,000 were entered into with individual consultants, and over 215 contracts were signed with firms or other entities. In addition to those, ADB finances many more consulting opportunities under loan and grant operations, and those packages are tendered for and administered by our borrowers. As our portfolio of investments grows, and as more projects come online, the demand from our borrowers and grant recipients for more consultants, for more and better civil works contractors, and for a broad range of goods and equipment constantly expands. All business opportunities financed by ADB, whether for goods, works, or consulting services, or any types of services for that matter, are publicly advertised on our website, and you will learn more today on how to access these later on during the workshop. In the coming hours, you will learn more about our pipeline of investments in agriculture and the agribusiness industry, as well as in the education and health sectors. Those investments are in addition to many more in the transport and energy sectors, as much as in other large infrastructure projects. As we all know, all sectors of all our economies have been severely tested since the beginning of the pandemic. Travel restrictions have made it more difficult for people and goods to move freely. In most countries, the strings of the public purse have tightened, and many consultants and contractors have been left idle as their source of revenues dried up. Gradually, though, and perhaps more slowly in some regions than in others, there are emergent signs of improvement as more countries slowly start reopening their borders, often subject to compliance with new health and safety protocols, but still. The same goes for ADB finance projects, as we also witness the resumption of operations in sectors that have been in some sectors that have been dormant for months. You will learn more about these later on. Since 2020, due to worldwide travel restrictions, we have not been able to host these events in person as we did in the past. And while it is still not clear when we will be able to resume those, we have continued our outreach to contractors, consultants, and suppliers worldwide with virtual workshops such as this one. Through 2020, we conducted 34 such workshops, and we are happy to see that today there's continued and perhaps even growing interest in business opportunities that ADB offers. We value our cooperation with business communities and agencies such as Austrade, and we again thank you for taking part in the discussions today, as well as we thank Austrade for making this event possible. This is why we encourage you to take active part in the discussions today, to feel comfortable to raise with any of the facilitators any question or concern you may have, so as to maximize your own benefits from this event. Thank you again. Now I'll turn back to you, Sheila. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was very enlightening, and going back to the past years of our engagement. To start the presentation, I'm pleased to call on officers from the Private Sector Operations Department, Mr. Martin Limon, Ms. Catherine Jarvis, and Mr. Brett Sutton to share project opportunities in agribusiness. Martin is the unit head of agribusiness at ADB. Martin has 20 years of professional experience, including 15 years of impact-oriented investment in Asia. As of 2021, Martin is leading a team of 15 bankers and analysts with annual delivery of 5 to 7 investments of total value close to $200 million. Another speaker is Kate. Kate is a food and agribusiness professional with 15 years experience and a passion for improving sustainability of food production, distribution, and consumption. She has deep understanding of global agricultural markets and agribusiness investment. Prior to joining ADB, Kate worked with UK startup that is developing technology to produce an animal feed ingredient using minimal water. Another speaker is Brett. Brett is an agronomist and an environmental scientist with ADB PSOD's agribusiness and investment team. He works to optimize development impact imparted by agribusiness investment and technical assistance projects, including through improving climate and disaster resilience of smallholder farmers and food supply chains. Over to your team, Martin.
Thanks, Sheila. This is Brett, and I'll actually start off today. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Business Opportunities Seminar. Martin, Kate, and I are here today to speak to you about ADB's private sector agribusiness investments. I'll first discuss the context of agriculture in Asia and the Pacific, including vulnerabilities and development needs. Then I'll hand over to Kate, who will speak more specifically about our team's strategy with regards to supporting agri-food systems across the region. In order to understand our strategy, it's important to first understand the context of farming in Asia. Agri-food systems in Asia are highly vulnerable to climate change. And with the upcoming COP26 conference in Glasgow, we wanted to take this opportunity to highlight the work that our team is doing to address climate change in food and forestry in Asia and the Pacific. 420 million farmers in Asia and the Pacific comprise 75% of the world's 570 million farmers. So agriculture across the region is dominated by small holdings. And in fact, the average size of holdings has decreased over the last 30 years. Much of the land is degraded, and irrigation already presents high demands on the region's freshwater supply. The two largest global hotspots for zoonoses are present in India and China, and South Asia and China are also at higher risk for antimicrobial resistance. Hotspots for both zoonoses and AMR are most significant at the interface between wild areas and human settlements, which is where many farmers reside. Smallholders have also been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has highlighted the vulnerability of farmers, and specifically to farmers in Asia and the Pacific, where smallholders dominate. To the next slide, please. At the farm level, so first of all, let's look at how climate change impacts agri-food systems in Asia and the Pacific. At the farm level, farmers are going to experience higher temperatures and increased frequency and intensity of both droughts and extreme rainfall events. Pest life cycles will adjust, new pests will emerge, and these present new novel problems to farmers. Input requirements to achieve similar yields will increase, and additional irrigation will be needed, with farmers bearing increased production costs. At the macro level, Asia's freshwater supplies, remember 80% of which is already allocated for agriculture, will be further stressed by increasing demands from farms to mitigate heat stress in plants and livestock. Additionally, the risk of emerging infectious diseases will rise with the effects of climate change. As the climate warms, diseases are likely to adapt to survive in higher temperatures, which may reduce the protection offered by thermal barriers of mammals. The reduced effectiveness of these natural barriers to disease will lead to an increased reliance on therapeutics for treatment of diseases in both humans and livestock, which highlights the importance of reducing the contribution of livestock farming to AMR. Workers that interface with animals, specifically farm workers, veterinarians, and abattoir workers, are at the highest risk of contracting zoonotic diseases. And last, some foods show reduced nutritional content when grown in simulated conditions at higher temperatures. The widespread impact on nutrition related to climate change isn't really fully yet understood, but it could be significant. Next slide, please. So ADB intervenes at the macro level by investing across agribusiness supply chains and provides a wide variety of products to suit the needs of the companies we work with. Where agriculture is dominated by smallholders, yields are respectable, and there is limited additional land that can be brought under agricultural production, as is the case in Asia. Studies have indicated that investments in supply chains are among the most effective methods to improve climate resilience in agri-food systems. Additionally, we have climate finance, which provides direct support for improving climate change mitigation and adaptation. This is often offered at concessional rates using blended finance. At the micro level, technical assistance is often provided alongside investments, but to smallholder farmers and other supply chain participant beneficiaries. This is a way of improving development impact of our projects and is often provided on a grant basis. Thank you, and now I'll hand over to Kate, who will speak on our team strategy and objectives in the coming years.
Thanks very much, Brett. So ADB's private sector agribusiness investment team is active along the entire food and forestry value chain, and we would describe that as being from seed to supermarket, and we would also include within that value chain recycling, so we can think about the circular economy, particularly where it pertains to food and beverage packaging. And also the recycling of agricultural waste is something we are exploring. Our clients are established companies that have strong operational and financial track records. The companies may be domiciled outside of developing markets in Asia, but the activity of the investment must occur there. The loans that we provide may be either CapEx or working capital, and due to the pandemic and the associated disruptions to logistics and value chains, working capital loans have become increasingly important for our clients. Promoting rural development and food security is one of the 7 operational priorities of Adb Strategy 2030. And with our investments and technical assistance, we're striving to support healthy food, prosperous farmers, thriving industry, and a sustainable planet. As Brett's mentioned, agriculture is a sector that we can't ignore when addressing climate change. While global food systems account for 34% of greenhouse gas emissions, the sector is also, as Brett has outlined, the most affected by climate change. We believe very strongly that agribusiness has a critical role to play in climate change mitigation and adaptation. It's estimated by the Food and Land Use Coalition that $350 billion in annual investments are required to transform agriculture globally to be greener and more resilient. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our agribusiness investment team is actively contributing to this objective. Our climate mitigation projects to date have included methane capture for livestock and energy efficiency in food distribution. Climate adaptation so far has included controlled environment agriculture, drip irrigation, and training in climate smart agricultural practices for over 35,000 farmers. We're currently processing investments that would improve the climate resilience of an additional 106,000 farmers. In addition to what we've done so far, we're also exploring exciting new areas to address climate change for agriculture in Asia. On the mitigation side, to invest in plant-based protein, which will replace animal proteins that have a higher carbon footprint. On adaptation, we are developing projects to replant aged cocoa trees with climate-resilient hybrid varieties. And at the intersection of mitigation and adaptation is regenerative agriculture, in which there may be opportunities for farmers to earn revenue from carbon credits when they make changes to their practices, such as adding organic fertilizers or eliminating tilling or burning. These are just some of the examples of the innovative areas that we're exploring in climate finance in the agribusiness investment team. Next slide, please. I'll now share some examples of past projects undertaken by our team to provide a flavour of what we can achieve with our client. As Brett mentioned, in Asia, investment in agricultural value chains is among the most effective way to improve climate resilience of smallholder farmers. In this project with Olam, Adb provided a $100 million loan. Olam is obviously a leading global agribusiness company. Adb's loan to Olam supports its expansion in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam. Olam buys coffee, cocoa, cashews, and pepper from over 100,000 smallholder farmers across these countries. The investment's climate value included support for 110,000 agroforestry farmers. While agroforestry is relatively climate resilient already, a $3 million technical assistance program provided extension support to 30,000 of smallholder farmers to improve their climate resilience. And the next slide, please. Our second case study is at Dalat Has Farm in Vietnam. And for this one, we have a short video. So I hope we'll be able to press play on the video, please. Great, thank you. It seems like that might be difficult today. This is a fantastic video and it really clearly outlines the development impact of our project. So I may suggest that we can share the link with the audience at a later date, and I would encourage everybody to take the opportunity to watch the video. It's 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So actually that then brings us to the end of our presentation today. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us. We'd be glad to receive any questions, and also please reach out to Brett, Martin and me. I think our email addresses, we have at least Martin's address there, and we can provide the email addresses for Brett and me. We would be delighted to work with Australian businesses to explore opportunities to support the development of private sector agribusiness in Asia, particularly where we can deliver strong climate benefits. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate and Brett. Really, the value of agriculture value chains took the front seats this pandemic, and we see a lot of developments in the coming months and years, and happy to support your the challenges that you bring forth to the Asia Pacific. Thank you, Kate and Brett. And yeah, okay, to share with us the projects and activities in the education space, I am pleased to introduce Ms. Shanti Jagannathan. Shanti is the Principal Education Specialist in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of ADB. She works on ADB education sector policies and strategies and provides technical advice to ADB's lending and non-lending education operations in the Asia and the Pacific region. Shanti has over 25 years of experience with education sector, transformation initiatives in school education, technical and vocational education, and training and higher education in Asia. Over to you, Shanti.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the welcome. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this session today. I'm representing ADB's Education Sector Group. I'm pleased to make this presentation of business opportunities for consultancies in the education sector. Next slide, please. So let me start with the context in which ADB's investments in human capital development are programmed. As we all as it's well known, Asian economies have led high growth rates globally, and in fact, this trend is seen to be continuing even in the post-COVID period. While obviously some level down is expected in growth rates, the Asian region is projected to grow at a faster rate compared to the global average. And it's become increasingly clear that to sustain growth rates, Asian economies have to focus even more strongly on knowledge-based growth that requires higher order education, skills, and talent development. In a post-COVID scenario, as Tony also explained, where economies are struggling to revive industries and jobs, we need to strengthen the focus on reskilling and investment in digital talent. And these two could actually be the two important levers for post-COVID recovery. So, but at the same time, while the region holds a lot of promise, it also has several well-known problems that need to be dealt with, which include inequality, disparity, lack of higher order skills, and less than uniform digitalization. So next slide, please. So let me go into some of the challenges faced by our developing member countries. Top of mind for everyone is what's now being widely called as learning crisis in the education sector. In the earlier years of development cooperation in education, there's a lot of focus on increasing universal access to education. Currently, the discourse has shifted to problems around learning and inadequate quality of education. So a learning crisis is one in which students, although enrolled, are not reaching desired levels of learning or competencies. Contributing to this and compounding the problem of inadequate learning are ineffective teacher practices, lack of professional capacities in the system, slow pace of curriculum development, new developments, and that incorporate creativity and learning to learn principles, and also inadequate attention to soft skills and digital skills. So an aspect that has increasingly come into the spotlight during COVID is the lack of preparedness, particularly in public education systems, for using digital technologies and for teaching and learning, and using such technologies also for improving employment prospects. But the good news is that governments are increasingly cognizant of the challenges and increasingly ready to address lacuna in learning levels and equity. And COVID-19 has actually been a very loud wake-up call to address digitalization in a fair and equitable way, and in a way that actually serves the interests of students and learners. Next slide, please. So this slide gives you a visual presentation of ADB's existing portfolio in education sector lending and grant programs. As you can see, South Asia is, South Asia holds by far the largest portfolio of education programs with nearly 50% share. The other big region is Southeast Asia, which has over 1/3 of the total portfolio. The value of the current portfolio is around $4.3 billion across the education sector. In terms of subsectors, TVET or skills development occupies the bulk of the portfolio. The share of TVET is more than 1/3 of total programs in ongoing portfolio. The next slide, please. This slide shows the pipeline between 2021 and 23. The regional and the sectoral breakdown actually are pretty similar to our ongoing portfolio, so they sort of mirror the sort of shares and projections, except that for tertiary education is projected to double in commitments compared to the currently ongoing portfolio. So this also reflects what I said earlier about the importance of building higher order talent and higher order skills for knowledge-based economy. Next slide, please. If I can now move on to talk about typical consulting opportunities in the education field. Typically, they can be clubbed into 3 categories. The first being the design phase or the project preparatory phase, during which that we typically call transaction technical assistance or knowledge and support technical assistance. For implementation, we would typically have technical assistance that piggybacked to the loan or project or the program, which then serves to support project management and implementation, and also monitoring and evaluation. So a range of services may be sought, which could be in the nature of routine M&E for conducting baseline, midterm, and inline evaluations, conducting thesis studies for graduates, and assess impact on employment. So this is typically done towards the end of the program. In using, ADB uses the results-based lending modality in many cases. Actually, education was the sector that pioneered this modality in ADB. We also require things like annual verification of achievement and of targets and milestones. And these are usually contracted to third-party verification agencies at the country level, who may also have tie-ups with international partners. So in all these, for these opportunities at the design, implementation, and evaluation phases, ADB recruits consultants both individually as well as through firms. Next slide, please. Let me now talk briefly about expectations and requests from our partner countries when we design and implement our partnership programs. So increasingly, partner countries are seeking more than just development finance from ADB, and it also sits with very well with ADB's own approach of finance plus partnerships, which means that we would like to leverage on top of ADB finance, leverage additional financing from partners, and also implementing knowledge solutions to difficult development challenges and knowledge partnerships. Developing countries also ask us to share with them what we consider to be global best practices or information and insights on how advanced countries have gone about addressing certain challenges and issues, and how they came out of it, or how they address certain thorny issues. Whether it's skills development or university education, our partners are increasingly looking to benchmark themselves globally and are seeking information or knowledge so which is what we try to embed in our TA programs. So ADB's approach is therefore to build a strong value addition to governments by partnering with them, by bringing high quality diagnostic analysis and evidence-based policy making. And it is for these areas that we look to partner with, consultants and technical experts from outside ADB. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'd like to go over some of the key areas that are growing in importance, continue to grow in importance, as well as some emerging areas that call for technical and consulting partnerships. In school education, while ADB does have interventions in early childhood and primary education, much of our focus is on secondary education. So the priorities that we seek to implement are to do with how do we improve quality of science education or STEM disciplines in a way that's equitable, in a way that involves girls, that in a way that it's also open to students from remote areas. Given that globally, many studies point to the lack of inadequate soft skills, or those that are now generally clubbed under 21st century skills relating to problem solving, creativity, and so on. There's also growing focus on how do we incorporate such skills in addition to regular academic curricular objectives. So we are also looking to see how we can incorporate such skills in secondary schools, and also the principles of learning to learn, and how can we also monitor and assess such competencies as they're achieved by students. These are far more difficult to assess and to monitor compared to the regular academic disciplines. So building capacities for assessing for the academic part of it, assessing student learning across the board is also a critical piece of dealing with the learning crisis. This also relates to how new technologies that are now available can make this more real-time and more strongly leveraged by educators to change classroom practice. With the rise of digitalization, we're also keen to bring more learning on how digital skills can be assessed online, and how blended learning approaches can be delivered and supported. But also these call for changes to instructional design, teacher training. How do we keep up with the latest learning management systems, and how they can be applied in public school settings. In TVET, which is where the bulk of ADB's portfolio is sitting, skills for jobs have always been a central objective. In line with the trend of times, we are looking for skills that can be applied to climate resilient and green occupations, to the needs of the health workforce, as well as the broader care economy that includes elderly care, and also how can we help the transformation of traditionally low productivity sector like agriculture through high-tech agriculture that brings quality jobs and improves productivity. It's also important for us to address higher order skills in the context of future labor markets, and how can we help to increase productivity of industries. So we're looking to see how we can support new institutions like the Skills University to build advanced skills. So our client preoccupations also include how we can pivot traditional practices like labor market information systems, which have tended to be expensive and time consuming, to more agile and real-time labor market forecasting using current technologies. But we also need to ensure that they are adapted to the context and can be affordable, like artificial intelligence-based job matching platforms are gathering pace, and we'd like to explore how we can bring such frontier technologies to bear on public education and training systems. In higher education, the focus areas revolve around research, innovation, and efforts to strengthen startup ecosystems and accelerators and incubators. When we think about advanced skills, we also think digital and new technologies that are in tune with the partner countries' development or aspirations. Given the rise of online learning, attention is being given to digital credentials, blockchain for qualifications. All these will really transform traditional practices of higher education institutions. Next slide, please. I'd like to share thoughts on new modalities in how we can look at technical cooperation with our external partners. So when we think about technical and professional support, again, we need to be in tune with the aspirations of our partner countries. We are looking to go beyond short-term consulting into long-term partnerships through institutional twinning, peer knowledge transfer, collaborations in research and exchange programs for faculty and students between advanced and developed countries. So you also like to develop centers of excellence as lighthouse institutions. Next slide. Next up, I'd like to just mention ADB's Strategy 2030 that was also referred to at the beginning of the presentation, and also Operation Priority 1, which is where education is located. So again, I think Strategy 2030 signaled the departure of moving away from sector silos to more intersectoral work. And in this context, we look at education being bundled with health and social protection to amplify development impact. But also in a number of ways how we can look at education in the context of post-COVID recovery and so on. Next slide. In these final two slides, I like to go back to some of the topics in which Australian expertise and collaboration would be fruitful. We look for expertise that's relevant in the global context and in the context of critical areas of quality around school leadership, reforms in examinations and assessments, development or deployment and development of affordable technologies, strengthening the role of private sector to scale up quality education, new pathways for equity in the context of girls and disadvantaged youth. And we'll also like to explore possible university networks that can help to increase the quality of tertiary education. See, on the one hand, next slide, please. On the one hand, we'd like to build on and expand partnerships and collaborations on traditional areas of interest, such as student learning assessment. For instance, the Australian ASER has a global role to play in student assessment systems, the quality of tertiary education. On the other hand, we'd also like to open up areas of collaboration, particularly in the multi-sectoral context or in intersectoral approaches, such as smart cities and education, how we can, partner with Australia, which is already collaborating with ADB on smart cities and so on. So how can we address education and training challenges that can support a smart city development, and also how we can build education and training into fighting climate change, clean energy, and sustainability in higher education. So thank you. This brings me to the end of the presentation. In the appendices to this PPT, which I presume will be made available to you, I have included a list of all ongoing projects and programs in the education sector and in the pipeline up to 2023. So please take a look and we'll also be happy to put you in touch with our colleagues in different regional departments should you have interest in specific projects and programs. Thank you.
Education is another challenge sector this pandemic. So thank you very much, Shanti, for sharing the opportunities and attention in exploring development projects in the region and being relevant with the times. And we take note of the ADB Australia Technical Partnerships for Education. Thank you. Thank you. So at this point, we now proceed to the health sector. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Benjamin Collin. Ben is a public health physician and medical epidemiologist with 17 years of experience in strengthening health systems in Asia and the Pacific to address complex health threats such as emerging infectious disease, antimicrobiological resistance, and undernutrition. Prior to his time at ADB, Ben was the Director of Health Security at the Burnet Institute in Australia. He received his medical degree from the University of Melbourne and holds a master's degrees in public health, tropical medicine, and the field of epidemiology. Over to you, Benjamin.
Thanks very much, Sheila. I want to do a couple of things here with health. One is just to outline some broad areas of opportunity that emerge from the pandemic and the lingering effects of the pandemic, but also ADB's new strategy in health, which will take us up to 2030 in line with Strategy 2030, which was outlined at the beginning of this session. I also then want to turn to some of the pipeline projects that we have across our regions as an illustration of perhaps opportunities for businesses working in health in Australia. So I guess the first thing is that ADB has stepped up and provided enormous support to our developing member states throughout Asia Pacific. So we quickly mobilised billions of dollars in emergency assistance to support health systems, provide personal protective equipment, and sustain economies as they faced, dealing with the pandemic. So some countries took loans of $1.5 billion, Philippines and Indonesia, and many hundreds of millions of dollars for some of our other countries in the region. I guess our flagship response has been the Asia Pacific Vaccine Access Facility, or APVAX for short, which is a $9 billion facility earmarked to procure vaccines, which, as you know, the global suppliers of vaccines have been problematic for many countries, including Australia at times, but have been a particular problem for poorer states throughout Asia Pacific. That $9 billion was also earmarked to support vaccine delivery systems. The provision of vaccines alone, particularly new mRNA vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, which require unique cold chain requirements, requires really a reordering of vaccine cold chain systems through many countries. And some countries are simply unable to receive those vaccines at this time. So tremendous opportunity still with vaccine development, vaccine supply, and the systems, the entire health ecosystem that goes into delivering those vaccines to improve coverage and reopen economies. Now, as Shanti illustrated, most of ADB's activities, loans to governments, grants to governments, come with technical assistance, and that's what ADB prides itself on. It sources the best technical assistance from around the world, and Australia has much to offer in terms of health technical expertise. To provide, in this respect, we've delivered particular technical assistance on building the health workforce to deliver COVID vaccines, expanding risk communication so that their communities are armed with the best information and are keen to be vaccinated. And we've also had a particular look, given the shortfall of vaccine availability for our member states, to vaccine manufacturing. And again, Australia has some expertise in this, but our particular expertise in regulation of medicines and the evaluation of new medicines, including COVID vaccines. So to that end, the ADB actually convened a regional vaccine advisory group, which is headed by Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration. That really showcases Australia's expertise in the regulatory landscape, leading a group of 10 other national regulators from Asia Pacific, but also bringing in Europe and America to try and overcome some of the regulatory hurdles that come in acquiring vaccines for our developing member states. That kind of problem, I guess, the regulation, the standard delivery, the lack of maturity on that front, I think opens up opportunities across the board for Australian companies. Next slide, thanks. So the pandemic, obviously we haven't delivered vaccines sufficiently to arrest the spread of the pandemic, and it may yet be, COVID-19 may yet become an endemic disease. But there are some tremendous lingering impacts which could last for the next 10 years, the lifetime of our next health strategic plan. One is the demand for and utilisation of health systems. This has altered in the face of COVID, particularly as it relates to primary care's ability to deliver health in the midst of a health emergency, as well as secondary care systems and tertiary hospital systems, which have struggled to deal with sudden increases in severe illness. So those systems need to be developed in the long term, and that includes things like oxygen ecosystem. Most countries do not have reliable supplies of oxygen, and there are millions of people who miss out on that simple, basic therapeutic. The other thing is the health supply system. So not just related to vaccines, but the supply of all medicines and therapeutic goods. These are fragile in most countries, and they can learn from Australia's expertise in the reliable supply of quality medicines and vaccines. Then, and this relates a lot to what Shanti was talking about, particularly with digitalisation of healthcare. We need to scale up the lessons learned and the gaps in our responses to pandemics and the fragility, and address the fragility in the health systems, and apply new innovations as quick as we can. And some of those relate to digital health solutions that have emerged in the face of the pandemic. Then we have long-term impacts, which the bank is acutely worried about, particularly with the tremendous spends to cope with the pandemic and how that will affect ongoing health budgets in the future. The other thing is restoring trust in health facilities, which have been battered by COVID. The shift to considering COVID-19 an endemic disease once we have sufficient vaccine coverage, and what that means for ongoing supplies of vaccines and new medicines which are coming in to both prevent and treat COVID, and how we should ensure equity of delivery of those products. Next slide, please. So we see that COVID coming on a background of large-scale trends affecting Asia Pacific. One is the broad demographic change. So most countries in our region are aging, and that brings with it new challenges to health systems. What kind of health workforce do we need to develop to respond to the challenges of aging? How do we keep people healthy in jobs and contributing to communities? But also recognizing that there are some countries, especially in the Pacific, where there remain huge youth bulges. So we can't forget about the challenges and the unique health conditions facing youth. Then we have urbanization, massive urbanization, which brings with it opportunities and challenges for healthcare delivery. Digitalization, which many have cast now in terms of health as perhaps a new determinant of health, a new social determinant of health, given the digital divide we're seeing within and across countries. And the other major trend I think we're seeing in health is who is making the decisions around health. Is it centralized ministries of health? Is it more with many countries decentralizing their health system? Is it subnational systems? Is it academia and think tanks who have provided such great contributions to responding to the pandemic? So we need to consider all of those. The other thing, I guess, is the emergence perhaps of new regional bodies which could do more to guarantee health security across Asia Pacific. And one of those I'll single out is the new ASEAN Centre for Public Health Emergencies and Emerging Diseases, which is in its early days of formation, but will have a mandate to protect health across all of the ASEAN states. And I think that's of keen interest to Australia that is a successful endeavour. Next slide. So our outlook, I guess, is that there's going to be increasing spending on health, not just amongst most economies in our region, but also for the ADB. For the last 20 years, ADB has spent around 1 to 2% of its total budget on health. That increased dramatically over the course of the pandemic, up to 30% last year. But ADB is looking for somewhere around 5 to 9% of total spending on health. So that's many times what we had in the past, and that opens up opportunities to Australian businesses involved in health. The other thing is that we are moving more to this one AD approach where health and other sectors are infusing all of the projects we do. So we get a health outlook on most of our projects, and I think this is much more in tune with the development challenges we face today and the need to have multiple sectoral and integrated approaches to dealing with these problems. Then I think we have more and more demand for knowledge products. We've had over the last 5 years about a doubling in the number of knowledge products in health that the bank is asked to provide, and that opens up opportunities for Australian consultants who could produce such products for health. Next slide. So our health strategic framework for the next year, 10 years in broad terms, will look at governance and policy issues, health workforce, health systems architecture, so that includes digital systems, and new ways of incentivising healthcare delivery and healthy behaviours in both the public and private sectors. Next slide. So I'll just draw out a couple of illustrations of some pipeline projects in some parts of the world. So in Pakistan, we're looking at a new $50 million project to build health systems in particular parts of the country where it's weak. These are broad brush projects looking to enhance coverage of essential service, improve human resource management and governance and accountability. The important thing here is that with this particular project in Pakistan, the country program for ADB is looking to increase the share of health for this project. So moving up to a minimum of 3% for ADB programming in Pakistan. And it is likely that many countries will follow this route. The Integrated Perinatal Care project in Uzbekistan is interesting because it looks at a particular health need for Uzbekistan, but then it takes that out and broadens this so that the focus is also on building broader healthcare systems that are able to successfully manage budgets and deliver care. So a more integrated approach to developing programs which address specific health issues. Next slide. In Bangladesh, we are continuing an urban health project which started a number of years ago, where we it's really a project which seeks to extend health from not just government services, but to link up and improve standards across the many private providers, the NGOs and civil society organisations that provide care to millions in Bangladesh. The other aspect of an urban healthcare project, which is in line with ADB's Strategy 2030, is to consider health as a multidimensional outcome of lots of urban activities. So road development, water supply, new environmental projects to address sewage and waste management. So the linking up of all of those things in a large project to supply urban health. India, you might have heard of the new Prime Minister's project. It's really a nation-building effort to strengthen healthcare infrastructure across the country. So that includes new capacity for disease surveillance with new laboratories, information technology systems, building new institutes, which is an area I think Australia could assist India potentially. There are a number of projects spanning 2022 to 2024, amounting to some $1 billion of lending from ADB. Next slide. The Lao Quality Healthcare Project, again, is another extension in development. But this, I guess, illustrates ADB's focus not just on improving coverage to achieve universal health coverage aims by 2030, but also to improve quality. So we need to do both hand in hand. The Greater Mekong Sub-Region Project really is trying to address these areas that go back to the private sector speech you had before, talking about these watershed areas of risk for disease emergence and disease spread. ADB is looking to identify how populations are moving through these areas, what services they need to protect and promote health, and even to the point of looking at, do we need to develop new centres for disease control in each of these Mekong countries to drive down the risk of disease emergence. Next slide. And that Greater Mekong Asian project, this approach, ADB has a background approach to improve regional collaboration, intersects nicely with our People's Republic of China pipeline project, a $300 million effort to build institutional capacity. So this is really focused on new surveillance capacity, new laboratory diagnostic capacity, new response capacity, so that health systems can identify threats, report them early, and respond promptly. So really building ecosystems across all of the borders there in the Greater Mekong region. Next and final slide. And of course, in the Pacific, where Australia has a great interest, we are looking to extend healthcare from not just the capital cities in the small island states, but to expand out to rural health facilities where, you know, the quality and coverage both decline. So a number of projects there in Solomon Islands and Kiribati that we're building on previous investments in the capital cities of those countries. That's all from me. So thank you for listening and happy to answer any questions.
I should say thank you, ADB, for looking at our backs in the region and the focus on the lingering impacts of the pandemic, plus forging pandemic-proof digital health solutions. Thank you, Dr. Ben. Thank you. So at this point, we will be going over to the procurement section of this webinar, which is very important, especially for those who have not yet attended the seminars on how to do business with ADB. So our next speaker is Miss Galia Ismakova. Galia has over 20 years of work experience, including 21 years in ADB. She is currently the Principal Procurement Specialist and has been involved in promoting e-government procurement agenda, leading various ADB initiatives, including technical assistance to the Republic of the Philippines and also to the Philippine Government Electronic Procurement System, or PhilGEPS, supervision of the case studies on the development of EGP in the People's Republic of China, India, Armenia, and the Philippines, supervising group experts producing ADB e-government procurement handbook, implementation and administration of two regional technical assistance projects in setting up and strengthening the Asia Pacific Public Electronic Procurement Network. Over to you, Galia.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Good morning to colleagues in Manila. Good afternoon already to the audience in Australia. Today, I will be talking to you about how can you access opportunities. And you have heard from introductory remarks of Sheila. Sheila, thank you very much, that I have a special interest in electronic procurement and special interest in digital solutions. So I will be actually going through some of them to show you how you can access opportunities. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So today I will be talking a little bit about Asian Development Bank, and you already have heard a lot from my colleagues. And a bit about new ADB procurement policy and procurement regulations for ADB borrowers, the type of documents and instructions that you can find in our guidance notes and staff instructions that are publicly available for anyone to see. Procurement procedures are applicable to goods, works, and plant, and also to consulting and non-consulting services. Next slide, please. So the next slide actually will be a little bit of a presentation of what ADB does. And I was told that there will be a slight couple of seconds delay. So please do not worry. Thank you, Austrade. We have another video about Adb procurement system. Thank you very much. We will be going back to the presentation. So Asian Development Bank has been established in 1966 and Australia has been one of its founding members. Now it's grown from 31 member countries to 68 and 49 of them are from within Asia and Pacific and only 19 are outside. Adb offers a range of financial products which include loans, technical assistance and grants. Public sector and sovereign financing is extended to DMC governments and public sector entities such as state-owned enterprises. You have heard that our sovereign, non-sovereign lending is already reaching $14 billion right now. Next slide, please. So if we look at how we finance projects, we're looking at public sector or sovereign financing, private sector or non-sovereign financing. We are also having Adb funds and resources from different sectors. And we have co-financing partnerships with multilaterals, bilaterals, including, for example, DFAT Australia, and private institutions. We also operate with commercial financial institutions. Some of the projects have mixed financing that includes all of the above. Next slide, please. There is another thing that you need to be aware. It's a so-called Adb Project Cycle. I have some information about it in the web links, but you can probably look at them through at your leisure. I understand that we are slightly running off time. Next slide, please. So Adb Project Cycle, why do you need to know about it? Because the various stages on how we actually assist the governments, the developing one, the countries, depend on our country programming. The various stages from country programming to project completion and evaluation are known collectively as Adb Project Cycle. Majority of the countries would have so-called CPS, or Country Partnership Strategy. However, some of the small countries, notably in Pacific, have a Pacific approach that actually has the cumulative programming for a number of countries together. Adb provides financing for projects that will effectively contribute to the economic and social development of the country and also have the strongest poverty reduction impact. Because we operate in a number of places with different co-finances, including World Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, European Investment Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, DFAT Australia, MFAT New Zealand, etc., we actually are looking at maximizing and leveraging resources that we can provide cumulatively. Next slide, please. So we start with country partnership strategy, and we also supplement it with something called regional cooperation strategy. Regional cooperation strategy is relevant to, for example, Pacific region. There is a regional cooperation strategy for Greater Mekong, for CARAC or Central Asia, etc. So out of the country partnership strategy comes a so-called pipeline. And the pipeline results in a list of projects that we need to prepare. Next stage is a preparation of the project, which can be done through the technical assistance or, for example, a project financing facility, which is a loan that the government takes to prepare the contract. Next, there is a process we call approval when we bring such projects to the board, that followed by implementations where we need contractors, consultants, and suppliers to actually implement the projects. At completion of the projects, about 25% of the projects get evaluated by independent evaluation department. If you look at our project cycle, at every step, apart from approval, we need external parties such as consultants, contractors, and suppliers, and especially consultants. So my presentation today will actually be more focused on consultants. Can you please move forward? Next slide. So where do you find these country partnership strategies? You can find country partnership strategies at Adb website, and I have put I have put for you the web links to the strategies. You can search the strategies per country, and conveniently, again, for you, given that you are in Australia, I have actually screenshotted a Pacific approach for 2021 to 2025. You can browse them per region, per country. You can also look at something called Country Operations Business Plan, which is practically a snapshot of how is a country partnership strategy is doing, and whether we have a specific business updates between the times the CPS or country partnership strategy has been formulated until the next update. Next slide, please. When you are doing business, and especially when you are exporting, you normally are looking at what is the country, how do I operate there, and what do I need to see, what are the opportunities. With Adb, it is easy. you can go with country-specific operations, again, in ADB website, and conveniently located, you can look at strategies and operations business plans, and you can also drill the information about sectors and about the contracts and about disbursement and about the overall state of the portfolio. Next slide, please. So here is another snapshot for the country operations. Here you can see the country planning documents, such as strategies, country partnership strategies, country operations business plans, and regional cooperations strategy and programs, so-called RCS. So if you are able to see the screen very well, you also can see something called Master Project Design Advance Agreements as one of the new instruments that we are using for preparing the projects and high procurement readiness. And you also see documents that are called TA framework agreements. TA framework agreements are an important documents for consultants operating in ADB member countries. As we implement TAs in ADB member countries, there is a matter of taxation, and ADB consultants are generally exempt from taxation in the developing member countries through this instrument called TA Framework Agreement, and you can find the information on our website. Next slide, please. So I kind of gave you a little background. How can you find the information about the countries and where you can find the information about the pipeline? Let's talk about a different information that you might need. You actually need the information about how you actually bid for opportunities and what documents and what policy documents and instructions will apply to the transactions. So what you need to know is that in 2017, ADB reformed its procurement system and come up with a new Adb Procurement Policy, so-called policy, and procurement regulations for ADB borrowers. We supplemented these documents with staff instructions. People who actually done the business with ADB before knows about something called project administration instructions, or PAIs. So some of the PAIs are still operational, but with regards to procurement, they're mostly replaced by the staff instructions. And we also have an associated guidance notes, 26 of them, on different matters on procurement, including consulting and non-consulting services, including procurement of high-level technologies, use of electronic procurement, abnormally low bids, etc. So Adb Procurement Policy is approved by Adb Board of Directors, and policy specifies Adb's 6 core procurement principles. I will be talking about 6 Adb procurement principles and how they differ from other multilateral development banks a little bit later. Regulations are approved by ADB management or president. Regulations provide choices for borrowers to allow them to determine most appropriate procurement method. Staff instructions are approved by the department in which I work, and they define the roles and responsibilities for ADB staff, and they also give the indications of procurement decision authorities and also service standards. The guidance notes are what it is. They are guidance notes, and they provide best practice advice. We endeavor to update guidance notes as this best practice develops. Next slide, please. Since we actually have 2 sets of policy documents applicable to procurement, you need to know about the old procurement framework and the new procurement framework. So on average, our our projects are implemented within 7 years. So we practically have a tail end of at least another 2 years of implementation under pre-2017 framework. So you need to know that procurement guidelines, the latest update of procurement guidelines was in 2015, and it practically included the electronic procurement indications. Post 2017 procurement guidelines no longer got updated, and they now the procurement policy is indicated in these two documents, Adb Procurement Policy and Procurement Regulations for the borrowers. Next slide, please. Let's go to the Cisco procurement principles. I gave you a little bit of tips that somehow we are different, and how we are different. You can obviously see the economy and efficiency and fairness and transparency and value for money, where price alone may not sufficiently represent value for money. And in the past, we were saying economy and efficiency practically does represent value for money. You probably noticed that I didn't mention quality. Okay, so the situation is that in consulting services and in consulting guidelines, previously, quality was one of the core principles. And quality was not a core principle for procurement before. So when combining procurement regulations for consulting and non-consulting for goods and services, we decided not to throw quality away, but rather include it in procurement of goods and works as well, and non-consulting services. And this is one of the differentiating factors of our procurement policy from other MDBs. Can you please go to the next slide? There are some other indications that we need to know. One of them is fitness for purpose, which requires procurement arrangements to appropriately reflect the strategic needs and circumstances of the situation. We found out, as many other MDBs, that one size does not fit all. If you are trying to use the same procurement arrangements that you use for People's Republic of China as you use for Tuvalu, you are likely to be wrong either for China or for Tuvalu, or maybe you will be wrong in both cases. So we need to actually understand how the market worked in People's Republic of China or Tuvalu and determine how to reflect the strategic needs of the project and how to actually deliver this project efficiently and effectively, providing value for money. Next slide, please. We still have a matter of eligibility, and it's kind of easy and not so easy to understand. From one side, you need to be from one of the 68 member countries to actually participate in biddings. From another, we have started actually looking at eligibility a little bit more proactively. And we found out that there were quite a number of waivers for eligibility when we were co-financing with other partners. And every time we would co-finance with other partners, for example, with World Bank or with European Investment Bank or with EBRD, we would need to go for a waiver to the board of directors to ask specifically for this universal procurement. We also needed to have a waiver for specific situations when, for example, limiting procurement would not deliver economic benefits. So now we have universal eligibility for ADF, Asian Development Fund, plus co-financing. And every time when this happens, we would be actually putting this information in the procurement plan. There is another thing that needs to be communicated to the consultants, and it's a change in our RFP or request for proposals for consulting services. While the consulting company needs to be from the 68 member countries, we no longer require that the expert provided by the firm needs to be from one of the ADB member countries. This is actually beneficial for countries such as Australia, which welcomes immigrants. So, for example, you might be in a situation when you brought a very qualified person from South Africa, and previously this person could not be an expert for ADB, and now he or she can. Okay, next slide, please. Under new procurement policy, we may agree to apply alternative procurement arrangements, and these apply to procurement rules and procedures of another multilateral or bilateral agency organization involved in the project. In the past, for example, I was involved in a project in Kiribati, and in this project, we have been co-financing with the government of Australia and with World Bank. So we had one procurement package that needed to comply with 3 different regulations. And while we had word-to-word identical procurement policies with World Bank, our interpretation and the interpretation of World Bank were different. And it was a bit difficult, let's put it this way. At the end, we did reach a understanding how to actually how to reach the compromise and how to reach the same understanding of the same wording of the policies. However, when we are now talking about alternative procurement arrangements, we are putting the decisions on procurement to so-called lead parties, lead procurement party. And this lead procurement party can be ADB, can be World Bank, can be EBRD, or any other agency. Can be, for example, can be DFAT Australia. And once we take this route, we actually speeding up implementation. Next slide, please. So in terms of procurement methods and arrangements, we have the same kind of the same menu of procurement arrangements as we had in the past, except for electronic reverse auction. So electronic reverse auction wasn't, in fact, present so much, and we only just started having the framework agreements, especially for consulting services. Out of all this menu, I would say open competitive bidding is middle of the day, and request for quotation is also very prevalent for small packages. I have yet to see an application of electronic reverse auction. However, because it's in our policy, it is likely to happen. Next slide, please. So in terms of other procurement arrangements, they are about selection of consulting firms using 6 selections methods that you are probably aware of. Selection of individual consultants that can be direct selection or can be competitive selection. Procurement from specialized agencies, including UN agencies. And in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have used quite a lot of specialized agencies, including UN. Procurement in fragile and conflict-affected situations. Right now, we are in a situation, as you know, when our operations in Afghanistan came to a stop. However, some of these operations would need to continue to prevent a humanitarian crisis. So we are in discussions with some of the UN agencies about some of such situations. The use of procurement agents can be prevalent in some of the countries, notably in People's Republic of China, and you need to be aware of those. We also have a support to governments for public-private partnerships through our Office of Public-Private Partnerships. And we have the specialized procurement arrangements for this type of technical assistance. We also ramp up community participation in procurement, which includes non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations. Right. So next slide, please. What are the roles and responsibilities of ADB? ADB takes a leading role or a driving seat when we are a contracting party. And as you would remember from an introduction by my colleague Eric Gagnon, about $202 million last year were contracted out to consultants by ADB directly. However, majority of the procurements that we are actually presenting today is the procurement by the borrowers. The borrower prepares a procurement plan that is agreed by ADB, and the borrower is legally responsible and accountable for procurement. So ADB is not party to the contract and cannot intervene on your behalf. Next slide, please. So what does ADB does? Does ADB washes its hands and says, okay, it's not our responsibility, so just go and talk to the borrower? No. ADB and people like me or Eric actually review the borrower's procurement procedures, documents, bid evaluation, award recommendations, and contracts under a risk-based approach through either prior or post-review, so-called tempering, to ensure that the procurement process is carried out in accordance with the agreed procedures. Borrowers do have some discretion in how they take procurement decisions, but these discretions are actually within the framework of the bid documents as issued. So if they are outside the applicable discretion parameters, we, meaning me or Eric, for example, or other of our colleagues, have the responsibility of telling them that they are stepping the boundaries under which we would no longer be able to support their decision. ADB may, where necessary, provide extended support without diminishing responsibility of the borrower, and this happens a lot in specific. So we have been undertaking the selection of consultants for some of the Pacific countries through this extended support. Next slide, please. So I told you what ADB does, and now I'm telling you what you should do. You should critically review the bidding documents and see if there is any ambiguity, omission, or internal contradiction. And if there is such, raise the issue, ask clarifications, and notify ADB if necessary. The criteria and methodology for selection of successful bid are outlined in the bidding documents. If they are not clear, you need to seek clarifications. Next slide, please. So the specific bidding documents issued by the borrower govern each procurement transaction. If a bidder concludes that any of the provisions in the bidding documents are inconsistent with regulations or procurement regulations, it should raise the issue with the borrower. It is the responsibility of the borrower, again, to raise any issue of ambiguity, contradiction, and omission. And again, the borrower may still go ahead and still procure with provisions that are inconsistent with regulation. And it might mean that this borrower will be needing to finance this particular contract themselves without actually using ADB funds. Next slide, please. So what is your responsibility as a bidder? Non-compliance with critical requirements, technical or commercial, will result in a rejection of bid. If a bidder wishes to propose deviations to non-critical requirements, they need to actually quote the price for the fully compliant bid and separately indicate the adjustment in price that can be offered if the deviation is accepted. We generally publish the budgets. Sometimes when you see that the budget is unrealistic with the technical specs that were offered, you can say it can be achieved, but with the different technical specs. And here it is, here how you can do it. So once bidders already submitted the bids, they cannot change these bids. Next information. Next slide, please. So information on bidding opportunities under open competitive bidding may be obtained from procurement plans and also specific procurement notices. Next slide, please. So I'm actually showing you where can you find it on Adb website. If you go to projects and tenders and type www.adb.org projects, you can see here there are tabs for projects, documents, and tenders. So you can see the projects, and there you can actually filter results on your left-hand side per sector, country, and sourcing. Okay, next slide, please. You can search for procurement plans. Procurement plans get updated all the time. I generally approve update of a procurement plan at least once a week, and I'm only dealing with one division. So this is relatively relatively common. Next slide, please. So the information about tenders, here I would suggest you use the filters to actually get to see the real tenders, because you definitely do not want to go through 24,405 tenders that I have that I have uncovered through the search. So you do not want to look at something that is not active. You would probably need to look at something you are qualified for. Next slide, please. So there are specific policies that are applicable for recruitment of consultants and service providers. Quite a lot of people do not realize that until 2017, service providers have been covered under the guidelines on the use of consultants by Adb and its borrowers through a very short paragraph number 2.42. Now it's actually went to Adb Procurement Policy. And again, if you are looking at our staff instructions, procurement staff instructions, you will see that quite different to our other comparators. We allow quality evaluation for service providers. However, majority of our borrowers, when they go for contracting service providers, look at the request for quotation and possibly the lowest evaluated responsive bid. Okay, next slide, please. I assume that majority of the people who tune in today for this presentation are actually consultants. So I would like to hear if I'm wrong. However, in the past, we almost always had at least 80% consultants in these sections. So if you are a consultant with an individual or a firm, you absolutely need to be registered in Adb Consultant Management System. There are a number of reasons for this. One of the reasons is that this is where all the opportunities are. And second, very, very personal reason, I designed the system, so I am very proud of it. So next slide, please. So you can actually look at opportunities that are currently open. You can view shortlisted firms. Some of you might ask, why should I be looking at shortlisted firms? Perhaps you were not shortlisted, and perhaps you still are interested. Maybe you can offer into going into joint venture or association and still be involved. Or you can offer your services as an individual expert in the team. You can also look at awarded contracts for the Adb Consultant Management System and see which companies have been awarded contracts before, and perhaps see whether there is a specific trend. Okay, next slide, please. So what you can find in consulting services recruitment notice, which is in CMS. One, you can find a lot of information. On the project, you can actually find what this project is about. You can find the expertise and you can search by expertise, because sometimes you might actually be looking at a project in water supply and sanitation, but in fact, it wouldn't be about water supply and sanitation. It would be about, for example, digital transformation or something like this. So sometimes it's very interesting to search by expertise. Then you can look whether the consultant type is a firm or individual, how long is the engagement period, when it is published, when is a deadline, and you can view the notice itself. On the left side of the notice, you can actually find out the whether it is a COVID-19 related assignment or not. Okay, next slide, please. So we specifically have a COVID-19 response consulting opportunities, and a lot of them are for social development specialists, for epidemiologists, for practically for communication specialists, etc. So if you are one of those, check them out. Next slide, please. So how does the notice look normally? Notice have three tabs. The tab on profiles, tab of terms of entry, terms of reference, and tab on cost estimates. So the tab on profile generally tells you a lot of information, including whether there is a possibility for you to actually extend the assignment or have a downstream assignments that actually can come from your good performance under this particular project. So it is a good idea to actually check it out, because sometimes some opportunities may seem to be small when they are advertised, but they can actually balloon later, and this opportunity is already there, actually indicated to you. Next slide, please. The next step in our consulting services recruitment notice is terms of reference. And one of the things, the next slide, please, on which I have disagreements with some of my colleagues is that we disclose the budget. So my preference is to be as transparent as possible and disclose the budget. Sometimes it brings some kind of unintended consequences when individual consultants get selected and started saying, we know your budget, you can afford more. However, they might not be the best candidate for whom this budget was indicated. So some of my colleagues prefer not to publish the budget in order not to involve in these debates on whether the person is extremely qualified or averagely qualified. Next slide, please. Shortlisted firms, you can look at current selection, and you can look who got shortlisted, and maybe there is an opportunity for you in specific country, in specific sector, etc. Or maybe it was a specific selection where you lost and someone else was shortlisted and you were not. So we also publish historic information on shortlisted firms. The next slide, please. Which can give you an indication of what it takes to be shortlisted. Next slide, please. And out of which can come the situation, always the bridesmaid, never a bride, when someone is always shortlisted and never awarded a contract. So here we have people who are actually getting the contracts. So next slide, please. One thing that we want to achieve with every digital solution that we have is that it should be user-friendly. And I already told you that I'm very proud of the consultant management system. However, the usability of the system is not yet at par with Amazon, for example, and sometimes you actually need some kind of reference guide to figure out what to do next. So if you are in this situation, and I have been in this situation myself, you need to go into consultant tutor under ADB Business Center, again on ADB website, and there you can find quick reference guides and the learning videos. Next slide, please. So for ease of reference, I actually gave you the link. Next slide, please. We have, with new procurement policy 2017, we have implemented the new approach to consulting services, which where we want to achieve faster consultant selection, flexibility in selecting consultants, value for money, and stronger support for planning and contract management. So with faster consulting services, we have short advertising periods. Like previously, we were indicating 1 month advertising period if you were publishing the advertisement in a gazette or newspaper. And very often, people actually move to digital media. And if we're using electronic procurement system, we can achieve the advertisements faster. Also, if you are using electronic procurement system for delivery of proposals, you do not need to spend time on couriers. We have alternative procurement arrangements, and we had relaxed eligibility and shortlisting requirements. As I have indicated previously, eligibility for experts under the firms have been relaxed. And previously, Australian and New Zealand firms have been practically penalized for being in the region, where previous version of the guidelines stipulated that no more than 2 firms from the same country can be shortlisted. And sometimes, instead of having a good competition, we were just shortlisting 2 New Zealand and 2 Australian firms in the Pacific. Right, next slide, please. In terms of COVID-19 ADB response, ADB actually have a specific information on ADB website, and I do encourage you to check it out. Next slide, please. So in terms of COVID-19 response, we actually indicate where the response is. And if you check these small dots, you actually can drill to specific projects that ADB is referencing in its website. Next slide, please. So in terms of COVID-19 response, you can see that we have $20 billion of package that is ADB finance and not related to ABVAX, and $9 billion in ABVAX package as well. So the information on our website actually gives you an indication on both. Okay, I slightly ran out of time, and the next slide gives you more references. I understand that the next speaker will be talking about very specific experience, how they bid and won ADB project. I am on LinkedIn, and everyone who is attending this particular business opportunity seminar can get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, Austrade, to this opportunity to present ADB and what we do in procurement.
Thank you, Galia. Wow, that's ADB in 30 minutes. Thank you. And thank you for the new digital approaches in doing business with the bank, and user-friendly tutorial videos online. That's very, very useful. And also thank you for sharing that there are like opportunities from uncontracted projects in ADB. We would be sharing your slides to all participants. And also, we would like to announce later that we are also, Austrade is also coming up with the EC 101 guide in doing business with the bank. So it would be making tutorials in a very simple way. So thank you. At this point, and by the way, Galia has been part of the road shows also in Australia in the past years. So thank you, Galia. And at this point, we would be transitioning to the Australian case study. We will now move on to the more practical learning part of this session, a sharing of experience by an Australian company doing projects with ADB. And the company and the presenter was a participant like you before. So let us welcome CCB Envico. CCB Envico is an Australian-based company focused on water and wastewater infrastructure. They are also part of the Reeves Envico group, which specialize in the water industry, processing engineering through CCB Envico's construction and infrastructure related work. Our speaker for today is Mr. Simon Gorman. He is the managing director of CCB Envico and Reeves International, and provides strong strategic oversight and technical direction of projects. He has significant international experience of having spent time in a director and country director of roles in aid in Indonesia, Rwanda, Somalia, Vanuatu. He has also managed construction projects in Hong Kong, Pakistan, and New York. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Sheila. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, clear.
Yeah, good. Okay. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Galia, for the prior presentation. I think the ADB have said how it should work. I might say how it does work. And we're not that far apart. It's what I suppose for the people still listening, my message is really that there are opportunities in doing business with the ADB and other multilaterals and donor agencies out there. And ours a case study that could tell you how we tapped those opportunities and how we're still tapping them. Next slide, please.
Simon. Simon. Simon, we can't hear you.
Sheila, you hear me?
Yes, okay. All good now.
Okay. Next slide, please. So how we started with the ADB, we attended seminars. My first seminar with the ADB was in 2008, I think, where I went to one of these, which was an in-person one prior to the days of COVID. We subscribed to the tender platforms and looked at the bank websites, and we took the view that we would focus on specific geographical areas. We established contacts in the bank in the water and sanitation sector, and I attended the Adb Business Opportunities Fair in Manila. And from those that experience, we looked at the geographical area that we concentrated in the first instance was in the Pacific, because Reeves had prior experience in the Pacific, and looked for partners with experience in those areas and utilised the Reeves experience in those areas. In 2010, we bid, won and completed our first water project with the Adb, and that was in 2010. So that was our first opportunity. It was about an $8 million wastewater treatment plant opportunity in Ponape in Micronesia. Next slide. So how we kept going from there, we continued with a focus on the specific geographical areas by looking only at Pacific countries and countries where Reeves had particular experience, which was Vanuatu and Micronesia, and we had some contacts in Sri Lanka, and we also had a couple of contacts through the Solomon Islands as well. We've been doing work in the Solomon Islands. We worked on our relationship building with partners and subcontractors in those areas, and how we tried to, how do we keep going within those areas? We look after our reputation. I think Galea mentioned you're not really doing business with the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank is the umpire to make sure that you have access to country governments, and the contracts are with country governments. So our satisfied clients are the governments in the Marshall Islands, in Ponape and Micronesia, in Kiribati, in others. How we keep going is we focus on our staff and their capacity and attitude to do work in the regions that we're chasing. Our staff are incredibly important to us, and you can't pick people from Australia who you've been working with and assume they will be able to work in any one of these regions. And I make the point that each country that we work in is very different, so you can't pick staff, whether it's in a consulting role or in what we do in the contracting role, and assume because they were good at their job in Australia that they'll be able to adapt to all the different living conditions, the different communication styles, the difference in communication styles even between Melanesia and Polynesia, and somebody's ability to work in a highly complex environment in Indonesia is completely different to what they might have been doing in Australia. They need to bring good technical skills, but they need to have the aptitude and the wherewithal to be able to work in different environments. And so when we find good staff, we try to keep them. How we keep going with the work that we've done to date is we use our business partners. We leverage off the support that EFIC, the Export Finance Group, give us, which is part of the Australian government. We work with ANZ, and we often work with Austrade to determine what products, what support we can be provided to be able to bid work in the areas that we do. New slide, please. And so just to give you an example of the type of work we've done in the last, and these are recent multilaterals and donor-funded projects, and I won't concentrate on this for a long time, but over the last 5 years, we've done approximately $80 million worth of work out through the Pacific, in areas such as the Marshall Islands, in Tuvalu, in Ponape, in Solomon Islands, in Sri Lanka, in Kiribati, Tuvalu, and the Solomon Islands again. And all of those are done by our staff operating out there, working with local partners, working with the local government, and working with our multilateral and donor-funded partners to deliver those projects. New slide, please. If you look at the Pacific footprint that we've developed over the last 20 years, and I won't go through all of these, but we have a large Pacific footprint now, spanning mostly the Pacific, but into Asia on some of the more complex, some of the embassy work that we do, and also some of the disaster-related work that we do. New paragraph. New slide. Sorry, not new paragraph. The current work that we've got on at the moment, in terms of our client base, is the World Bank in the Solomon Islands, the DFAT, the Overseas Property Office. There's quite a bit of work out there doing some of the stuff that has been discussed today, which relates to health work and relates to education. And, some of those things that were talked about previously about youth dislocation and urbanisation, all these things are being addressed by programs being run through our donor-funded and also multilateral partners. New slide. The key learnings, and these are the most important things, I think, in terms of doing work with the multilateral banks with ADB, is that foreign exchange management can be a big issue. And I understand most people viewing these will be consultants, but foreign exchange management, when you're working in countries that are highly influenced by the US dollar rate changes, we've seen projects go from 67 cents to $1.04, in terms of exchange rate fluctuations, and the ADB gives you an opportunity to fix exchange rate in most of their contracts, and I recommend you look very hard at those. The key learning is we need to look hard at our local partners. Part of the development of this is in developing our local partners and learning from them and just supporting them. And so, we have now local partners in most of the Pacific that we go to each time we tend to work, and that has a contribution to the local economies that we work in that may not be achieved if you're not looking at those things. There's a challenge at the moment in trying to stay competitive in a market which is dominated by the Chinese state-owned enterprises. And what we do is we really just stick to our knitting and bid the work as we see it, and hope that on some of the projects we bring a technical edge, or we bring a different approach that may not be mirrored by our competitors. And Eric and Galea talked about this, is really look hard at the technical documents. Look at the pre-qualification criteria, look at the technical requirements, and make sure you meet those, because bids get thrown out regularly on the basis of not meeting pre-qualification criteria. They're much harder, I'd have to say, than most of the criteria which is set on Australian-based contracts, which are to try and determine whether you have the necessary and requisite skills. But I think ADB and the World Bank take a much harder look at those pre-qualification criteria. In terms of the ADB and World Bank and selection, it is a bureaucratic system. It is getting better, but there is a high focus on process, and therefore you need to be able to demonstrate that you understand the process and that you're giving all the information that you need to ultimately win in that process. The places that we work in, and most of the places served by ADB, it's really about logistics. It's about logistics and your capacity to understand and operate within the environment, which are broadly different right across Asia and Pacific. And we need to be able to respond to that and demonstrate that we understand that those differences, and not try to bring a cookie cutter approach to one particular area on the basis of experience we might have had in some other area. I've mentioned staff, the interests and demands and a focus on looking after the health of our staff, both our local staff and our international staff, in areas that are often not well served by hospitals and by health systems. Work and business permits can be difficult, and you need to pay attention to those. And the work that we do, and it's the same as any work that a consultant or a contractor will do in these countries, they require planning and attention to methodology. And I always say, if you're not doing what you do well in your home country, then don't assume that you can do it anywhere else. In fact, it's going to be harder for you because it's less forgiving. Countries that are served by the ADB are less forgiving to companies that are unable to plan and genuinely think about the methodology they're going to utilise. New slide. So the current environment, I think for any consultants or contractors looking, there's an unprecedented investment in the Pacific. There's a newfound interest in the Pacific, and there's unprecedented investment occurring at the moment. And that will bring its own challenges to these smaller island states. And that's had the double whammy of looking at with the challenges of COVID and what have we had to do with that. What have we done with that? We've looked at project continuity, for some of the building and infrastructure stuff. We've looked at prefabrication. We've looked at how Australian manufacturing can be involved in that process and have a number of good project examples of that. We've worked really hard with the local health services in the areas that we're working on, looking at local vaccination programs on project sites to keep our team members safe. And I go back again, it's logistics. It's the same now in COVID, and even more with COVID and other considerations that restrict travel, is that Australian companies need partners. We need locally led solutions and local engagement, and our approach is so far held us in good stead. I wrote this a while ago that borders are notional. We try to have exchange programs with the countries that we use, and we've brought some of our local partners over to Australia to work on projects that we have here, and we try and have our own staff mobilised to areas that are less familiar to them, so that they get a sense that borders are notional. The whole just because Australia is bounded by water, it doesn't mean that we're not able to engage well out in the world. And this is just my little plug, because I'm in infrastructure. That infrastructure programs at the moment are really making sense in terms of the amount of economic stimulus that they provide to countries who have been battered by COVID at the moment. New slide. Yeah, so I put here a couple of photos of our work in Kiribati, in the Solomon Islands. That's a sports hall in the Solomon Islands. That team, the team on the far right-hand side, is a team that's up on Christmas Island, or Kiritimati, which is one of the most remote places that we've worked. And they just delivered a small infrastructure project out there, where our supervisor had to do 8 weeks of quarantine in total to go out and back to do a 3-month project. So it is difficult getting around. We sponsor some of the local communities that we have in Rugby. We have a focus on gender development, and the girl there was trained in Australia and then was able to go back to Kiribati and apply a trade as a camera operator in a sewer system. And look, why do we do the work that we do? Because it is highly enjoyable and highly interesting. New slide. So that's it. Thank you. I can only say that there are many challenges in doing work with the Asian Development Bank, but there are tremendous opportunities for organisations within Australia. Some of you will already be doing work with the Asian Development Bank, but there are tremendous opportunities, and I can only encourage you to get involved in it. Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you, Simon. It was certainly a lot of useful information shared by you. Imagine in 2008, as a participant, develop your Pacific footprint towards 80 million contracts in the next 5 years. And not only that, you're also working to reinvent yourself by working with local partners and having synergies with them. Thank you very much, Simon. And I know you have lots of questions, so we will now start the Q&A session. Ms. Grace Alcon, Austrade Business Development Manager for Education and Health, is here today to help us moderate the Q&A session. Please use the chat box to send the questions to Grace. Over to you, Grace.
you, Sheila. And I know we are running a little bit out of time, but I know that there are some questions also that are here. So we'll be strategic in asking the questions. For those questions that will not be answered by the panelists today, we can always send it to us, and we will answer it offline and send it to you, send you the answers via email. Just a first question to Simon, because he was the last who talked to us about his experience. In your experience, like if there were any tenders that were not chosen or were not approved, does Adb provide feedback once those tenders has been selected or didn't get selected, if you have any experience? Thank you.
Yeah, they do provide feedback, and it's general feedback. It's not a formal debrief, if you like, but they do provide feedback, and also where tenders didn't proceed, the briefing is much more detailed and as to why a tender didn't proceed. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Simon. To Galia, this question is for you. Is there a special CV or template or requirements for individual consultants? And for those consultants also who are looking at sector specific projects, like higher education, for example, are they clustered together when they look at CMS? Thank you.
Okay. There is an Adb specific CV template. However, the Adb specific CV template is actually an assignment specific. So you because it looks at your qualifications, and then it looks at how your qualifications and previous experience fit to this particular assignment to which you are currently applying. So you might be actually qualified for multiple assignments, but your CV is not the same for every assignment for which you apply. It's very similar for job applications. Sometimes you want to accentuate one type of your experience in front of another to be selected. And the second, for the sector specialists, for some specialists, it will be better to just look at the sector. For example, education sector, you will be looking at education. But if you are a communication specialist, for example, you may find that opportunities for you exist across different sectors. If you are a financial management specialist, procurement specialist, or economist, again, your opportunities may be in multiple sectors. Hopefully I answered the question sufficiently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalia, and I think that was very sufficient. So again, you know, there are sector-specific projects, and their opportunities might cut across different sectors. So that's very clear. Thank you. For Dr. Ben, so you realize here I'm going backwards. Dr. Ben, are there specific types of digital health innovations that you think would be suitable to support ADB's strategic objectives in health?
Yeah, for sure. So the current things we have going on really are around standards and interoperability. So we've been actually supporting the CSIRO has provided peak advice to provide a standards and interoperability lab, Asia, which is part of the Asia eHealth network. We're looking to expand that to develop standards for data collection in health settings across Asia Pacific. So that's number one. I guess we're also looking at innovations in healthcare delivery that have grown up through responses to COVID. So many countries have allowed new ways of interacting with medical appointments, so telehealth and the like, new apps which provide healthcare to patients outside of health services. So all of that, I think, can aid us in accelerating towards achieving universal health coverage. But many countries are really at the building blocks of this. So we actually need expertise around policy setting and direction in digital health. And we have had a number of hackathons to identify sort of cutting edge technology, how we might apply that, pilot it in various countries, thinking for scale up across the region. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ben. So because I have interest in health, that was actually very useful. I think we would be interested, there's a follow-up question around that when you talked about hackathons, you know, if there could be an opportunity for health companies, Australian health companies, to present their innovations. And I think we did that last year with the ADB. So if there could be another one this year, Sheila and I would likely talk to you, Dr. Ben, about that. For Shanti, the next question. You mentioned R&D partnerships. Is there an opportunity in supporting member countries in transnational education implementation for education systems to be globally competitive?
Yes, thanks indeed, very much so. Since ADB is ramping up the support to tertiary education in the upcoming period, a number of tertiary education institutions across the region are collaborating with ADB to strengthen their capacities in research and innovation. And in that journey, the potential for transnational collaborations, mobility of faculty, mobility of students, more development-oriented research collaborations, support to startup ecosystems, support to accelerators and accelerator networks, where the commercialization of research can also be facilitated, are all areas which are very, very important for possible collaboration. When we think about universities, we work with specific universities to upgrade the system. So, also bring in new and state-of-the-art curriculum and teaching methodologies, improved pedagogy, improved opportunities for learning. For instance, in Indonesia, as part of the government's efforts, there will be a big ramp up of universities being able to offer their education services online. So which means that the opportunities for students to access tertiary education is going to expand significantly. But the digital delivery will be very different from our physical brick and mortar university-based delivery. So we're also looking to partner with institutions to understand how this can be positioned in a way that each of the countries that we collaborate with, we work with a few universities, but also how they can help and energize the university system as a whole through networks and through peer sharing and through joint research projects.
Thank you so much, Shanti. And just in the interest of time, I'll ask one last question for Kate or Brett. And to answer briefly, could you share an example, if any, of a capacity building program or technical assistance in agribusiness or climate change wherein a university or academic was involved? Just top of mind.
I think this is a question for Brett. Brett,
Yep.
are you? Yep.
Yeah, we have had academics on a number of our TAs, usually like an agronomy expert or something of this nature. Usually this is not, this is under kind of the umbrella of a consulting firm that manages the overall project that has brought an academic into the fold as one of the experts on the TA implementation team. That doesn't mean we wouldn't entertain applications for a university or an academic kind of organization to manage an overall project. We just haven't to this point received those kinds of proposals.
Thank you so much. I think we've run out. Sheila, do we still have time for one last question? Just one.
Okay, one last question.
One last question. Anyone can answer this, or probably Galia, if there is an outlook or a first forecast of sector-based projects, let's say energy, for Pacific regions, if there is any.
I think it will be easier if someone who has control over a screen will go to adb.org, and I will just guide you how to look for it.
That's okay, Kalia. Thank you so much. I think that's about all the time we have. For the other questions, we will just answer it offline and send to everyone.
Okay. Sorry, Grace. So what
sorry.
you need to do, adb.org, you go to countries and you want to find a specific Pacific island country. So you select this, and then you select energy, and then you click on search, and then you will find it.
Okay, I'm just typing it now. Also, adb.org, select energy and select projects, and then they will find it there. Thank you so much, Galia. Sorry.
Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for Q&A. I can see there's still a couple of questions in the chat box. Please feel free to contact our ADB speakers, including Simon, Christopher, or myself. We have our contact details on the screen, and also Grace for health and education. And we would also like to invite you to our session 3 with the World Bank on Thursday. That's 11 o'clock AETD. Don't worry, we would be sharing the presentations to all the participants. So in behalf of Austrade, I would like to thank Edie, Tony, Kate, Brett, Shanti, Ben, and Galia and Stefan and his team for joining our session today and sharing useful information on the project opportunities with ADB. I have a few summary with regards to our webinar today. For example, for Agribiz, it zooms from seeds to market, and the value of agribusiness value chain takes a front seat in this pandemic. And for health, it's focusing on forging digital health solutions and cutting edge technologies. For education, they are also looking for technical partnerships and collaborations in trans education, and also digital approaches in doing business with the bank. There's a lot of consultant tutorial videos in the ADB website, and also learning from Simon with regards to focusing on a certain region, like they have focused on the Pacific, and that produce a lot of contracts for them. So this concludes our session. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar. A copy of the presentation and the recording of this webinar will be available on Austrade website, and we would also email this to you. Have a good rest of day, and see you all soon at the next session. Thank you.